My first memory impression, it's a lot to take in. Any missionary knows that. Everything's new. So I remember trying to just remain calm, and that's I think the best way to do it. Don't try to take it all in at once because you're with a new companion. If you're going to Guatemala, chances are it's a good chance you'll have a companion that doesn't speak English. So you won't have the best communication at first. But I remember just loving it. The people, for example, were amazing. I remember as soon as our taxi arrived right in front of our house, my companion and I reopened the area, so he didn't know it either. And some members that lived like literally 10 meters from us were there to greet us. They gave us the key, gave us a big welcome, and they were really loving. And then after that, we went and met our cook, because we don't cook our own food there. And she's also a member that lived like 2 blocks away, and she was just the best lady in the world. She was like our mom. I think those are my first impressions, just meeting the wonderful, loving people of Guatemala. Well, first of all, the mission geographically covers a huge part of the capital city. It shares the city with 2 other missions, but the majority of the city South Mission has, including the temple, which is the best part, in my opinion. I loved it. It also covers, how do you say, departamentos? Like states, you could say, called Jalapa, Jutiapa, and Santa Rosa. And those 3 places are considered outside of the capital, so they're typically poor, but really, really nice people. The church, in our mission, there's only currently 2 districts, meaning that everything else is stakes. Like, let me see, there's a lot of stakes. There's Guatemala, Mariscal, Nimahuyu, Utatlan, Milagro, Montserrat, Florida. I think there's 8 stakes in the mission, and 2 districts. No, there's more because there's Jalapa. Yeah, I think there's 8 or 9 stakes in the mission. The church is very established there. The temple, I had it really close to me in most of my areas, honestly. And that is a huge source of strength, obviously, for the members to be able to teach it to investigators, take investigators there when we would take converts to do temple baptisms and things like that. The people typically there are either Catholic or evangelical Christians. Those are like the 2 main groups of religious people there. And then behind that, there's a lot of Mormons, and there's a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses. And the church has been growing in Guatemala steadily ever since it got there. It's only been in Guatemala since 1945-ish. And it's just kind of grown really fast. There's already 2 temples there. There's 6 missions. And that's due to just tons of miracles, really. The people have faith. They have like an automatic, just culturally built into them faith in Christ, which allows them to do hard things for Him. Like stop smoking, like get married, do what they need to do to be worthy for baptism, and progress in their lives. And so I never saw anything but progress on my mission. The people, as long as we were doing what we needed to do, the Lord provided always people that were willing. And so the church grew like it's always grown there, and it started there, and from there went to the rest of Central America. So I could talk a really long time actually about this because I read a book about it. The way that the church came to Guatemala was, and thus all of Central America, a man named John Forrest O'Donnell, who was born in Mexico but was part of a Mormon colony there. He was really agriculturally awesome, I guess you could say, and he was really close with high church leaders. And so by the time he was in his 40s or 30s or something, I want to say, he one day went to Guatemala by assignment for the U.S. government. And while he was there on that work assignment, he felt, wow, this place needs the gospel. And so he went to the prophet back in Utah when he got back, who I believe at the time was Joseph F. Smith, and he said, we need to send some missionaries here. And so they sent like 2 to 4 missionaries from the Mexico mission down to Guatemala, and things just started rolling really fast. And that was in like 1945 that the first missionaries got there. And now, well, like I said, there's 6 missions, 2 temples, tons of stakes, lots of growth in the church. The people are converted, and so they stay when they get baptized. Simple enough. My areas were, my first one was called Piedra Parada, which is southeast of the capital city, really close to the temple as well. Then I went to a place called Nueva Santa Rosa. The first area is like a little town, like a village you would almost call it. And my second area was like a step up from a village. It would be like a town with tons of villages around it. And that was in a place called Santa Rosa, what I mentioned, the outside state. After that, I went to a place called Villas del Milagro. And that is more part of the capital, but it's way out of the way also. You have to drive like down this really skinny road that is on top of like basically what you would call a ridge with canyons on both sides. And then once you get to the end of this ridge, it kind of flattens out, and then there's just a large development of thousands of literally the exact same house. So everybody lives in houses that are really tiny. So you would walk into one person's house and teach them, and then you walk into another person's house and it's like the same house, and you teach them again. So it was fun. Then my fourth area was a place called Monteverde, which is like the most urban area I had. And all my other areas I was really close to nature. Lots of dirt roads, lots of mountains or canyons or rivers. But this area was more city, and I loved it. Not a tree around hardly. No grass. It was all just cement. I loved all of my areas. That one was the smallest by far geographically, but the people would live like closer together. So you'd have a big house basically, and it looks like it's just a normal house, but on the inside everything's divided into like tons of apartments. So we could spend hours teaching in just one house, teaching from apartment to apartment, family to family. And then my last area was called Santa Catarina Pinula. I had 5 areas total, and I loved it there. I saw the most success on my mission there. It was wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. The Lord's been doing big things there. If anybody's been watching the news recently, there was a really big landslide in Guatemala that so far the death toll is like 500. It was really big, and that was part of my last area. And so I would love to go visit the people there and see them. I'm 100% positive I knew a lot of the people that have died, and I knew one of them. One of them was a convert who passed away, or died really, in that accident. But that place was also in the middle of a canyon. It was just a little village, and the canyon wall just basically fell down in a rainstorm, and it was huge, so it did a lot of damage. But I loved all of my areas, honestly. All of them I did. The members of the church there, no matter where I went, were always just wonderful. It's actually probably one of the smallest geographically in Guatemala, because it's got more city than any other, which means that it's got more dangerous places than any other mission. I'm willing to bet. I haven't really asked around, but yeah, there's a lot of dangerous places in the mission where normal people, when they would be like, "You guys live there?" We'd be like, "Yeah." It's fine, because normal people would be like, I'd never want to go there. That's where the gangsters live, and that's where the drug lords live, and typical stuff. But I've never felt in danger myself being in some of those areas, including the last one that I was talking to you about. A lot of violence happens, honestly. It does. It's not exactly a peaceful country. There's got a lot of violence, and that's not something necessarily that I ever looked for or hoped for, because you feel you don't want anything to happen to the people you love and are working with. But I would say that is something that was probably unique. You kind of saw more stuff happen in that regard. So life in Guatemala City, the city is the center basically of all economic growth in the country. So it's where all the big companies are. It's really where all the money is. It's outside, it's just way more poor. So in the city you have like the nicest things, you got the richest people for the most part, like 99% of the time. Your neighborhoods are spread out, but not really. Like, it's really not a huge city geographically. If, for example, you were to put a US highway into it, you could get across really fast, but the roads there are not as big, so there's a lot of traffic. There's tons of cars. Transportation, either a taxi, but that's expensive, so we would take buses. You'd pay 1 quetzal to get on a bus, a red bus usually, and it's like a 50-seater bus with about 100 to 150 people on it sometimes. And so you get around that way. By the way, 1 quetzal is like 15 cents or so. Everything's really cheap for us, right? For them, they work really hard. Like, their work days could be sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. But usually, if I find somebody who works only 5 days a week, that's like, they've got a good job. So they work as construction workers, building houses. They're constantly building things with brick and mortar, I think you call it, cinder blocks. And a lot of guys working in call centers, both in English and in Spanish. If you could speak in English when you're doing good. So you got call centers from Walmart, from cruise ship companies I've heard of, and companies like that. I want to say like Xerox or HP as well. So they've got a lot of call centers in Guatemala City. Life is pretty loud there. It really is. It's just kind of hectic for the people sometimes. They live simply despite that. Life seems complex here to me. We just have so many things constantly, even though we do live more peacefully, if that makes sense, because there's like really loud music, really loud cars in the city, like I was talking about, violence. So we never carried much, really. I would usually keep 30 quetzales in my pocket. That would be about $4, just so if you do get robbed, you got something to give them. But not much more than that. On a monthly basis, we would get about, I want to say, between 1,000 quetzales and 1,500, depending on if we paid the rent or if the office paid the rent. Houses can vary big time. Like that one area I was telling you about, where all the houses are the same. Our house was teeny tiny because all the rest of the houses are teeny tiny. And you just kind of get used to it. And we didn't have water a lot of the time there. It just kind of didn't come. So we would take showers with buckets. And it gets cold in Guatemala, believe it or not, because it's in the mountains. The elevation of Guatemala City is like 4,000 feet. So if you're in like the city center, then it doesn't get too cold. But if you start going up in like Santa Catarina and Pinula, my last area, or my first area, way up there, Piedra Parada, it's really cold. So you wear a jacket at night, I slept with a quilt most of my mission. I really did, because it gets cold, gets chilly at night. Not like to to where it's snowing or you can see your breath much. That only happened like 3 times or something like that, but to the point where if you're not wearing something more, you'll get cold because the humidity mixed with the cold, mixed with the wind, just like goes through your bones. It can be really cold sometimes. The weather there, though, honestly, is like perfect. Perfect. It's called the land of the eternal spring in Guatemala because it's always between like 60 and 75 degrees in Guatemala City. It's super nice, very sunny. The clouds are so cool there. It's insane. Like, I could probably go on a trip there and just look at clouds. It's amazing. They're constantly forming, constantly changing, and moving really fast. And they might move fast here, but you can't tell because they're so high up. But they're like right there. So in my first year, for example, which is just kind of on the outskirts of the city, up in the hills, it would be covered by clouds a lot of the time, so just tons of fog. What else? The neighborhoods are kind of organized as like colonies, so it's not like a grid, it's not like a block. You don't have circles and nice patterns. You've got like dead ends and all kinds of, pretty much think of any kind of organization in a neighborhood and mix it all together and you've got Guatemala. Also, in Guatemala City, there's tons of canyons. So there's bridges that go over them in the city. There's people that build their homes down into them, and that's really common. So those are usually the really poor communities that go down and down and down into these places. And it's really all over the city, like from one end to the other. There's just tons of canyons and little rivers. You can see volcanoes from any point in the city, really. Specifically, el volcán de agua, the volcano of water, which is just huge. I loved looking at it. I don't know. I just love looking at any kind of mountains, but especially those volcanoes in Guatemala are just so pretty. Like, they're really majestic. This one especially is known for being like a perfect cone shape. It's really, really cool, really big. It's not in my mission, so we weren't ever allowed to go to it, but we could look at it all we wanted, so it was fun. The cost of living, usually an apartment per month would cost like between 900 and 1500 quetzales. It really just depended on the neighborhood, because you could literally, the difference in economic status could be really drastic, literally from like one spot to another spot 10 feet over. You could get somebody living in a shack of sticks, literally, to somebody living in a mansion right next door and doing like really well, as if they were living in the United States. That was something that was very unique. The cost of living for that reason varies a lot. Also in neighborhoods, there's a lot of gated communities actually, where you can only get in if you know somebody and the guards who have shotguns know that you know somebody, or if they just know you and know that you live there. And I lived in one of those places, so we paid 1,500 quetzales a month. We lived above a member who rented to us, and they were awesome, wonderful family. That is really common, that members will have like an extra apartment and they'll rent it out to the missionaries. It's like 7 to 7.5, depending on the day, basically. That would be $1. So Santa Rosa is like just south of Guatemala City. It's hotter, so the elevation starts going down. You go from the city and you start going towards the coast as you go south. So the more and more south you go, the hotter it gets. And I was in a place called Nueva Santa Rosa, which wasn't too bad because it was still kind of up in the mountains-ish. It was in a valley, surrounded by mountains with one volcano, like the main viewpoint, I guess you could say, right in front, directly south of the town. And it's way different, totally different world, honestly. It really is. Like, the level of education of the people goes down drastically as you go outside the capital. There's no colleges in the capital, or there are. There's schools, but there's less kids going to them, I guess you could say. So that is a tricky thing. The people are much more poor. Especially in Nueva Santa Rosa, what you see a lot is houses made of adobe. So they'll make, instead of cinder block houses, you'll have houses made out of blocks of mud, basically. Because it's really cheap. It was like 1 quetzal for a block of mud versus like 7 quetzales for a cinder block. And those houses had electricity a lot of the time. And so they would just like bring a wire in and attach that to a light bulb, usually. The electrical setups could be pretty sketchy sometimes. We never volunteered to help set those up because it's dangerous. But outside, the people were usually more kind because they have less. They're humbled by their circumstances. So they're very open. They were like kind of surprised to see us sometimes because, well, mainly me, because I'm white, blonde hair, blue eyes. They've never seen that sometimes before, especially as you go out to some of the villages where missionaries have hardly ever gone, and they're just like, what? And they're staring at you as you walk by. You're just like, hi. And they're like, hi, who are you? So that was always really fun. Out there, outside of the capital, typically the church is not as strong, and at least in the South Mission. More branches. So the branch I was in had, on average, like 45 people that would go to church, versus the average in the capital was closer to 150, 170 in church every Sunday. And just members that haven't been members as long, so they know less about the doctrine of the church, they know less about how things should be done. And there's just more opportunities to teach members in that way as well. You take buses that are really fast. They are school buses that they'll like trick out. They put Caterpillar engines in them so that they can go up the big hills and mountains of Guatemala and down them and stuff. And they're really fast, even though they're totally full of people and filled with things on top of them on the outside, like produce that they will buy in the capital and then bring back to town, or bring to the capital to sell. But that was always really fun to go in the buses. It's very pretty, a lot more wildlife. You don't really see any animals in the city because they're all dead, because they will eat them. Like if they find an armadillo or a large rodent called tacuacin, I don't know how to say that in English. If they would find that, they're going to kill it and they're going to eat it because that's dinner. So in the city where there's more people, there's like no animals at all. Whereas outside of the city, you'll find there's these really cool lizards that were like this big that weren't iguanas. They were these lizards that would just run really fast. They almost look like those bearded things that can run on water, but they weren't. So you'd see snakes more often, really big insects. The insects there are really big, like a grasshopper once that flew onto my shirt that was this big. Without joking. It's huge. It's a lot of fun. A lot of fun. It definitely has a different feel. It's more quiet. You could sometimes be walking to a house, stop, and you wouldn't hear tons of cars. You wouldn't hear loud music. It just calm, peace. In that sense, it's really easy to feel the spirit outside of the capital. Not that it's not on the inside, like if you're looking for it, but it's easy to feel the spirit, for me at least, in nature. Like Nephi, going to the mountains to pray, like Moses. I kind of felt that way, being in Santa Rosa a lot. The zone, all the missionaries are spread out much more there. So in the capital, to do splits, for example, with your district leaders or with your zone leaders, you wouldn't have to travel a whole lot. Whereas outside of the capital, in Santa Rosa, you would have to we would have to take a bus that took about 40 minutes to get to where our zone leaders lived. And to get to our district leaders, we'd have to go another 20 minutes, so it was like an hour. And that usually was extended due to traffic or like all the stops that the buses make, picking up people, dropping off people, all kinds of stuff. So I would say that was something unique about being outside in Santa Rosa. Well, their culture is very religious. Very, very religious. If I'm not mistaken, Guatemala has more churches per capita than any other place in the world. Don't quote me on that, but I've heard that said before. Because there's churches everywhere. You'll have a Catholic church in the center of basically every town, because the Spanish helped found and establish so many towns there that they forced the Catholic churches to be the center. And then, like, not far at all from that Catholic church, you'll have an evangelical church. And then next to that evangelical church, you'll have another one from a different shepherd, what do you call that, pastor. Well, that's pretty much really common. You'll find churches all over the place. They're really religious. You can talk about God to basically anybody, and it's normal. Does that make sense? Like, it's totally normal to just go around talking about God with people all the time, because even in their daily speech, they talk about God. They will say, for example, primero Dios, which means God first. Like, if you ask them, are you guys going to go to the soccer game tonight? They'll be like, primero Dios, God first, we're there, man. They'll just constantly be thinking about God. Like, if you talk about a blessing, they'll be like, wow, God is so great, isn't he? They just all have that awesome faith. I loved that about them. You could be friendly and talk about God and relate it to the restoration of the gospel with anybody all the time. They're really hardworking people, insanely hardworking. So to give you one image of that, to get firewood to cook your food with a lot of the time for the not as well-to-do families, they would go walk down a mountain or into a canyon or into the forest and chop up firewood with a machete, stack it all up, put it in a bundle, and then that bundle goes on their back, and then like attached to that bundle you have a rope that goes on their forehead. So they carry like 100 pounds worth of wood on their forehead. It is insane. They're very hardworking. They're, like I said, very religious. They're very loving. They love America. Almost like 99% of Guatemalan people love Americans. And they think Americans are really nice and that we're very giving, because they see a lot of charity things being sent. I see tons of clothes being sent from the United States. Like almost everything they're wearing, if it's not made in Guatemala, like what I was telling you about the corte, then it's probably from the United States. On men, women, children, everybody. So they're very grateful for that. And they're just wonderful, wonderful people. I always thought of them as, personally, I think that they're very special, chosen people, and they showed it all the time as they accepted the gospel and lived it and just exercised so much faith in Christ. So the more love you can develop for them and the more they can feel it, the more you'll be able to help them. So just learn to notice all these good things like I've been mentioning about them, and you're going to have a great time. They're going to love you, you're going to love them, and you'll see a lot of miracles. Before anything, like, don't freak out, because the church is really, really, really careful with us. Some examples I can give of that really fast. For example, there was an area in the mission that got really dangerous really fast. Like, the gang there kind of targeted the church. They killed somebody, and then they basically put like a warning out to the church and to the church members. They put a lock themselves on the church gate. And there's a guy who's in charge of security in Central America who knows everything. I don't know how he does it. But he found out really fast, called mission president. He said missionaries need to be out of there in an hour, and they were gone. And as far as I know, there's still not missionaries there, but you'll be safe always, so don't worry about that. But things to know, don't be too curious. Here's a good example of what to do. I was with my companion who's from Ecuador, and he was finishing up his mission. We had just gotten back from General Conference. We went up to the stake center, and we're coming back. It was already nighttime. We were there like all day watching General Conference. And as we got back, literally we were walking into our neighborhood, and there were gunshots like really, really close. And so the thing isn't to stay. What my companion did, he just started running to the house. So I just started following. I just started running. So do that. Don't run towards the danger, run away. That's the best way to do it. Again, don't be nervous. The people that do get killed there are people that get mixed in with the wrong people. So if you're being targeted by a gang to be killed, it's because you have gotten mixed up with them, have gotten mixed up with drugs or with a number of other things. So crazy stories. Well, there's a lot. I never actually saw anybody get killed, and I'm really thankful for that because I'm a sensitive person. I'm like really sensitive. I don't know, I can't handle seeing that kind of thing very well. It's traumatizing for me. So I never saw anybody actually get shot. I heard a lot of gunshots. It's just the reality of living in that country, in the city. It's not uncommon at all. Like, there's a lot of gangs, there's a lot of drugs, a lot of delinquents that are young that get into the wrong stuff. And they end up usually just killing each other. So it's really sad. But it's just kind of a reality that you get used to. I mean, it's nothing strange for the people there or for us. And it does escalate. It does go like from being really calm to a neighborhood to like really crazy sometimes. But the government there has done a decent job. Like there's this one place, my third area, where it's called Villas del Milagro. This place that's called El Milagro was basically in like a war between gangs not too long ago, like 10 to 15 years ago. And it was just insane how many people were getting killed from the gangs and getting killed in the gangs. And now there's just a strong military presence there. So there's soldiers in posts with machine guns every quarter mile all through the town and in some of the roads up to the town. And there's lots of police, and they keep things peaceful enough. I think that's well as much as I'll say. As far as subcultures go, Guatemala is really, really cool, and that the native culture has been saved a lot. So the people that have been there in ancient times were the Mayas mainly, and they were separated into tons of different tribes. So the Mayas would live in Guatemala. They did for a long time, and they were divided into tribes. And so they were at war for a long time, and tribe fighting against tribe all the time. So they developed differences, for example, in what they wear. But it all looks really similar. But like the longer you're there, you realize that you can see what somebody's wearing and say you're from this place, because all the people from such a place wear the same type of pattern on their clothing. Typically just the women that are from those places will dress like that. The men now just wear like pants and a shirt, but the women will wear like it's called corte, and the material is called huipil. And so it's really expensive. It's made by hand, really fancy, really pretty, and they usually only own like 1 or 2 pairs of that clothing for their whole life, that they just rotate. And so it's like if you've seen a Tongan or Samoan lava kind of thing, it's like that. They wrap it around themselves, and then just that it's thicker. It's a thicker material because it does get cold there. And then they've got like a blouse on top that is usually very intricate and ornate. And so you got a lot of that culture. They speak 24 dialects of that Mayan language in Guatemala. So it was not uncommon at all for us to find somebody that really didn't speak Spanish very well. You get languages like Quechua, Cachiquel, Canjoval, Mam, Pocomam. Like, I know these names mean nothing to you guys, but basically they're languages that they only speak in certain parts of Guatemala, and people come from all over Guatemala to the capital city. So we ended up getting to know people from all over the country. So the capital city especially, is just like a melting pot of Guatemalan culture. And it's very cool, very pretty. You get to meet people from all over the country. And then you've got a large community in the eastern part of Guatemala that is like close to the Caribbean, that are black people. And they speak a language called Garifano, that is like an African / Spanish / French / Creole type language. It's pretty crazy. And they're a lot of fun, really cool people. So there's a lot of different cultures. We'd go from teaching one person that spoke a language called Cachiquel to going to another family that spoke a language called Mam. And like, even though they sound similar to us, they don't understand each other at all, and so they're totally different. Even from like one tiny village over to the next, they could speak a different language, and it's very cool for sure. And they were always very willing to teach us if we asked them to, or to pray in their native language. Usually somebody could speak Spanish well enough that we could communicate just fine, or like 1 out of 5 maybe could, and they would translate. I remember we had one family converts that they spoke Mam, and the husband spoke Spanish and Mam very well, and so we were teaching him, and he was progressing a lot. He was like, yeah, I'm getting baptized for sure. And his wife was still holding back. They were Christian, evangelical Christians before, and she just didn't seem to be getting it, and we couldn't figure out why. And it came to my companion, the inspiration. He's like, what if Eliodoro, the husband, teaches Amarilis, the wife, and Mam? And so we started teaching him in Spanish, and then he would teach his wife and Mam. And it was just like all clicked. She was like, oh my gosh, this is true, I get it. And she got baptized by him because he was progressing faster, and so he got baptized, got the priesthood, and then like a week after he got baptized, or 2 weeks, he baptized her. History, earthquakes. There's been tons of earthquakes there. Usually they're just tremors, but I felt quite a few on my mission. It's pretty cool to feel, honestly. I felt 2 just being in the MTC alone, and you can feel it because you're kind of sitting down a lot in the MTC learning or eating or something. When you're out in the field, you don't feel it as much because you're just going, walking, or teaching somebody, or talking, or lots of stuff. But, so there's a lot of earthquakes. The last really bad one was in 1976, and it was really bad. A lot of people died. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. There's a lot of volcanic eruptions from this volcano called Pacaya, and the volcano of fire. And they're never like huge, but they'll shoot up ash. And so I remember one time we were cleaning up church for a ward activity. We were just with all the members cleaning up the church, and there was like a lot of dust, we thought, but then later we realized that it was tons of ash falling because the volcano had erupted that day. There's sinkholes randomly, so that means that basically a huge chunk of the ground just kind of falls. That's really uncommon. Hasn't happened a ton, but it's kind of famous for that as well. I love the food there. I really do. It's so good. I got used to it really fast. I loved it right off the bat, honestly. They eat tons of beans, tons of tortillas, tons of bread, lots of eggs, chicken, lots of plantain. I don't know if you guys know what that is. So your typical Guatemalan breakfast, I'll start there. You've got beans, which could be made in a number of ways, but you've always got your beans. You've got your beans that are so good, you can't make them the same here. You just can't. They have too much talent. So they'll give you your beans with a cream on top. I don't think there's an equivalent here. And Guatemalan cheese that they'll sprinkle on it. Ah, it's so good. I'm getting so hungry, seriously. I miss it. I really miss the food a lot. I ate it every day, and I loved it every day. So you've got your frijol, your beans, and then you will usually get a scrambled egg or a fried egg if it's a wealthier family, or at least like not really wealthy, but you know, that aren't really poor. And then they put a lot of like tomato salsa on it that is really runny. It's like a juice almost, but it's so good. They don't eat tons of super spicy stuff, so I'll get to that later. I'm still on breakfast. Right. Fried plantains. Those are amazing. Plantain is like a large banana, basically. It's just that it's harder, and then they fry it. It's just heaven. It's so good. So good, seriously. Can't wait for you to try those and bring me back some. With all that, you'll have either tortillas, which are made from corn and are made by hand, always. Like, there's tortillerias, places where they make tortillas, all over the place, all over town. Same with bakeries. Like, every street has one, basically. So, for every meal, you'll just go buy, like, a stack of tortillas or a bag of bread, and you eat that with every meal. So whatever there is shortage, maybe if you don't get a ton of food on your plate, which you don't really, you fill up on tortillas and bread. At least that's what I did, because I eat a lot. Despite my small physique, I eat a lot. I have fast metabolism. And so that was your typical breakfast. Delicious. And then they've got mush. Oh my gosh, mush is like this oatmeal drink that is just incredible. I don't even know how to describe it. It's so good. And they make these things called atol as well. That it's like a hot chocolate. Think of hot chocolate, so you've got kind of a thicker drink, but it's thicker than hot chocolate and different flavors. So you've got that oatmeal-ish type stuff. It's insanely good. It's got kind of a vanilla-ish taste to it with oatmeal in it, and you just drink it, and I can't even tell you how good it is. It's so good. And then you've got your atol of plantain, which is just super delicious. They make a lot of tamales, and here in the States, I think we're more familiar with Mexican tamales. They're kind of harder, drier, and like not too big, and they'll wrap them up in a corn husk. But those are Mexican. Those are not Guatemalan. So the Guatemalan ones, they're really soft. They're wrapped up in banana leaves, and they're bigger, and they are delicious. Really, really good. They've got like the dough-ish stuff that is kind of, it's made from corn usually, or potato, but those are called paches, so that's different. But they've got like chicken usually in the middle, and it's good, really good. They'll have those like in an insane abundance Christmas time. So Christmas time, you guys are gonna get so full, it's not even funny. You will spend the entire 24th just eating tamales. No matter where you go, you're gonna get offered tamales. So it's not uncommon to get sick eating tamales around Christmas time. Just have fun with that. They eat a lot of chicken, fried chicken. I remember in Nueva Santa Rosa, for example, there's a Central Park in the middle of the town, and all around it there's nothing but chicken. I could never understand that, because they're all selling literally the exact same thing, but they managed to stay in business just selling chicken. So they love their fried chicken. Breakfast and lunch, by far the two biggest, most important meals in Guatemalan culture. I wish it was like that here. They don't eat a big dinner at all. They just eat a big hearty breakfast, usually a bigger lunch, real good stuff, and then like a small dinner. And that was pretty much it. But just enjoy the food. You're gonna miss it so bad when you don't have it anymore, because I do. Ponche. Just look for ponche. It's like this amazing kind of, it's a warm drink with big fruit chunks in it. Pineapple, mango, apple. And they put sticks of cinnamon in it. Doesn't sound good, but it's darn good. You're gonna love it. Guatemalans typically speak not too fast, so don't worry. Like, there's way harder Spanish to understand than Guatemalan Spanish. They speak very clearly. They speak smoothly, softly, kindly. It's not super singy Spanish like Mexican Spanish is referred to sometimes. And it's not super fast and hard to understand like people from the Dominican Republic. But it's just fun. They like to say a lot of fun words. They speak in tú, not so much. They speak in usted a lot, if you've heard of that at all. And they speak in vos, which is informal. So they'll, for example, some jargons that you won't hear in other countries are words like chilero. That means like awesome. Or calidad. To say, the translation of that is quality. So they'll be like, you had a good day, que calidad. How quality is that? Awesome. They'll say that a lot. They say Simon, like, hey, you going to the soccer game today, Simon? It's like saying, yeah, I'm going, Simon. They have a lot of fun jerga. As missionaries, we can't be super informal and speak with all of them, but you hear them, and it's fun. And I can use them now, so you'll get to use them later. So that's good news. It's just really fun. Guatemalan Spanish is not too hard. Not too hard. It's pretty. If you really dedicate yourself to learning it and obtaining the gift of tongues, then I promise you'll get it. With really hard work, you'll get it. Yeah, they're called chapines.
Chapines?
Yeah. And so un chaparro o un chaparrito is like a small person. Like, oh, he's real chaparrito. He's really small, like short. And Guatemalan people are known for being really short, really small people. And so that's why they call them chapines. Bring tons of ties because it's the only thing you can really change up. So you're going to want to change it up. So bring lots of ties. You're going to read on your packet, your mission packet, that it says to bring like wool socks and cold gear basically. And you might think, no, that's crazy. I'm going to the tropics, you know. But do it, because you will use them. Because like I said, there are some areas that get really cold. So that's my recommendation. Listen to what the church packet that they send to you says. Get that stuff. I was more than good bringing everything I brought that they told me to bring. So that would be my suggestion. A really positive spiritual experience I had that came to my mind was, I remember one day in my last area, my companion and I were going to visit a family of converts. In my mission, in the South Mission, we focused a lot on baptizing and helping people stay converted and be retained in the church. So we visited and continued to teach converts after baptism. And sometimes it's easy to think like, oh, they'll be fine. Let's go like find somebody to teach that we haven't found already or whatever. But I learned to really take care of them, take care of the converts, and we ended up seeing so many blessings from that. So one example I'll give of that is that we were going to visit this family of converts. They lived in one of those places that I was talking about where there's one big house but with lots of little apartments. So we were going down because you had to go downstairs. They lived like going down like a little gully up on a really big hill. And so we were walking down and we saw some kids playing, and we recognized one of them was this family's son. So we said hi to the kids and shook their hands, and we saw that a father was playing with them. And we said hi to him, but just real casually, going towards the convert family's house. And they were playing with a ball. And I remember this really vividly because it was a tiny thing. But the ball left the railing where they were playing. They were up above. And I grabbed it and I threw it back up to the father. And he looked literally directly above the family of converts. And I just felt like I needed to present myself to him. So I asked him, hey, can I come up and present myself to you? I just directly told him like that. And he was like, yeah, come on up. And so my companion and I, we went up and presented ourselves. And we had a jovial first meeting, I guess. And we said, can we share something with you? And he said, yeah, please. And we went in, had a wonderful first lesson, and they were really receptive. He and his wife was inside. They ended up being just one of the most incredible families I've ever taught. They were so ready, and they told us the second lesson we had with them that they had felt so confused, and that they had felt like there was something more for their lives that they needed, and they had been praying to find where God wanted them to be as far as the church goes. And when we showed up, they said that they felt that their prayers had been answered. So it was a really small thing. The Spirit prompted us to say hi to him. We did it. They had an amazing transformation of life and just an increase of happiness. They got married and baptized not too long ago. And that was a hugely positive spiritual experience for me, just because my companion and I were doing everything we possibly could to have the Spirit with us in abundance. And for that, we were able to receive that prompting. Again, this same area, we saw tons of miracles in my last area. So a spiritual experience we had was with another convert of ours who we'd been teaching for a good chunk of time. My companion and I had been teaching him for about 2 months. And he knew the doctrine, he was going to church, and he just didn't feel that desire to be baptized. We did our absolute best, like I was saying, to teach and preach with tons of power and authority and with a strong presence of the Spirit. And he could feel it, and we knew he could, but he just didn't have that desire yet to be baptized. And so this is a story kind of again about, number one, not giving up on your investigators, because they deserve all we can give them, and they deserve that we look for all the inspiration and revelation we can possibly get to help them progress. Like, look for all the ways you can to help them progress. So my companion and I, Sunday morning, we take out other priesthood holders, usually younger guys, to do splits, and be able to bring more people to church that way. Go to their door, invite them to church, and help them get to church Sunday morning. And my companion felt inspired to invite this investigator of ours to come with. And so he came with us. I wasn't with them. I was with other priesthood holders inviting other people, but this investigator went with his friend who was also a member, and with my companion, Nelda Hernandez. And this investigator invited someone else to come to church. And he said that when he did it, he felt like this incredible warmth and joy, and he just loved it to death. And he knew from that moment on that he needed to get baptized. And my last Saturday in the mission, he got baptized. And that was a really special experience that was culminated by his baptism, but was the product of many times following the guide of the Spirit. And looking back on it, it was really spiritual for me. One experience that we had was my companion and I were going back again to that same place that's called Milagro. It was insanely dangerous, and now it's just really dangerous. And we got onto a bus once that, like, you just stick your arm up when a bus is coming by and they stop, and so the bus stopped, we got on, and as soon as we got on we realized it was a mistake, because number one, nobody was in the bus. It was just us two, the driver and his friend, and that's not normal. First of all, you usually find the bus like totally full, or at least with the seats full, or it wasn't normal. We could tell. The other thing, the driver was high on weed. He was totally high, and he was driving full speed downhill. Like, it was insane. Seriously, we were just praying, like, please let us get off this bus alive. And he flew into the main market where all the buses go into. I can't believe he didn't kill anybody. By the way, this kid who's high is like 15, and his friend is probably 17. I don't know why he wasn't driving, but that was pretty crazy. I'm glad I'm alive. I just wanted to share that a really important element of your mission is your relationship with your companion. Like, you're gonna have lots of different companions, and you must love all of them, but you may not like all of them, but do love them. You must love them and help them know that you love them, because it'll make just such an insane difference in everything else. It'll make the work go better just by showing love to your companion. And when you're done, I don't even care if he was your least favorite companion. You're gonna love that companion, and you're gonna want to be able to talk to him again and have a continued relationship with him, and be able to see now how is he doing in his life post-mission. And so by you showing that love during the mission, even if you may not get along super well with him, it's just gonna make a world of difference, and you won't have regrets for not having done it. The craziest food I ever had, it was pretty weird once eating a chicken head. So the eyeballs were still in it. They just threw it in a soup. I think it would have to be in Nueva Santa Rosa. I remember the rain will just come like that. And when it rains there, it pours. That saying comes from other parts of the world or something, but it really happens. Like, I remember it was around lunchtime. I want to say it was a Sunday. My companion and I had just gotten home for lunch or to go to the bathroom or something, and I remember just looking at one part of the sky, and it was blue skies, totally clear, and you could see like a direct, super easy to see line of just black clouds that were moving really fast. And as it got close, you could see a line, like just a wall of rain that just came really fast, so you could like run away from the rain and be dry, and then back there it's just getting totally soaked with water, and it comes down hard, that rain. The drops are really big. That was probably some of the craziest weather, and with all that rain comes tons of lightning, so the lightning storms there are intense and they're awesome. I learned how to live on very little, and I would say that is a skill. I learned how to live comfortably and happily with like the bare minimum sometimes. Not the bare minimum, but way less than we're used to, if that makes sense. Like, less food, because there's less food there, to be honest, and there's just not as much money. I learned to live on just way less possessions, just a bed. If you got a bed, you got the scriptures, got clothes on your back, and we got food going in, we're great. So I think I learned just to be really happy and content living with not much, I think. So I remember I was in the MTC in Guatemala, and so we use the word embarrassed, and there's a word in Spanish that's embarazada, and that they sound like they would be the same, and there's a lot of words that sound the same, like patience and paciencia, it's the same. And so I figured, oh, this must be another one of those. And so I went up to, or I said something wrong, and then I added to that wrong thing that I said in a class, I believe it was, and I said, estoy embarazada, which I thought I was saying, I'm embarrassed, but actually what that means is I'm pregnant. And so that was wrong. That was very embarrassing, and everyone had a real good laugh about that. There's tons of dogs in Guatemala. Like, they're all over the streets. They're just wild. They're like wild wolf packs. Just that they don't attack people so much. They eat trash and stuff like that. But you will get your occasional crazy dog. I have not been bitten nearly as much as other companions of mine. I was lucky. But you do need to be careful with the dogs. There's a lot that will bite you. I remember one night, I've only been bitten like twice. But I remember the first time I ever got bit, I was so surprised because this dog looked so nice. Went up to the door, knocked on it. We were looking for a person. Wasn't there, and the dog was just chill, like looking at us. And it was dark also, like really dark. There was no lights there. And but we could tell, there's the dog saw us and whatnot. But as we were walking away, this dog just really silently snuck up on me and grabbed my thigh and just bit me right on my thigh. And I reacted really fast and he let go, but I was just like, did you really just bite me, dude? What are you thinking? So yes, the dogs will bite you. Be careful with the dogs. Usually, good tip. Don't try to kick them or punch them or something. Just take off your backpack. That's your best weapon. It's your backpack. It's got a pretty good distance. You can get some good range on that if you swing that around. So yeah. This is just picking one hard experience. You know how it is on the mission. There's lots, but they're wonderful. But one hard experience that I had was that I was in my second area. I'd been out on my mission for about 9 months, and you have a camera, and I didn't take a lot of pictures, honestly, but the pictures I took were really special to me, and they meant something to me, and that's why I took them. And so I had all my pictures from my first area, all my pictures from the MTC with all the great friends you make there with the teachers and everything. And as we had transfers, we left Santa Rosa. It's like a 3-hour bus ride to the capital city where we get our new companion. And I remember my companion who was leaving the area, he his camera wasn't working or I don't remember what, but I ended up giving him my memory card to take pictures with, if I'm not mistaken. And anyway, in a transfer of memory cards in the bus, I lost it. And I was so sad. I was seriously so bummed. It sounds pathetic, but I was so sad that I lost all those pictures that meant so much to me. And right at that time, one of our converts, she lost something a lot bigger and a lot more important than that, and it was her husband. She and him at 1 o'clock in the morning were asleep, and to make a long story short, I think he owed somebody some money, and they came in and killed him in front of his wife. And they took his life. And so in that time of my mission, I just felt really kind of overwhelmed by so many things, because it wasn't just her that was going through hard things. We had so many other investigators and members going through just really hard things. And I felt awful that I felt bad at all about some stupid pictures when they were dealing with things that were just so much bigger than that. And so I learned to use the atonement more in my life and apply it, and first to my life and then to help others do the same. That was a really big learning experience for me. It was really hard. It really was. I was I felt really sad on the inside. Like, I tried to be really happy and help people feel the love of Christ and the joy of the gospel, but on the inside I felt really sad a lot of the time. And I felt like I wasn't progressing. Just in vulnerable moments, Satan usually always comes and adds more to what is already difficult. So that was a really hard time for me, but I learned to put my trust more in God and to be more thankful for what I do have and to let go more of material things, if that makes sense. Like, I learned to care just so much more about what is spiritual and about what really matters. That was one big hard thing that I was able to learn. The gospel of Jesus Christ is true. For me, that was my biggest life lesson. That everything that we represent, everything that you represent as a missionary is true. And for me, like, nothing else really matters. That's kind of, it is the most important thing to know in this life. And the rest of our decisions, the rest of what we do will be based off of that knowledge and be based off of our faith in that. I know that's a really vague response. I don't know if you're looking for that, but I feel that is one of the biggest things that I was able to learn from my mission. For all of you who are going to prepare to serve the Lord, I want you to know that my experience doing it for 2 years was the best experience I have ever had. It was sacred. It was difficult. It was rewarding. It was fun. And it means the world to me. It really does. I came to know Jesus Christ on a much more personal level than I ever had before. And I know that He guides the work that you are about to undertake. And I say I know that because I cannot deny it. And I know that if I did deny it, that I'd be denying something that is true. So I want to testify to you that being a representative of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is being a representative of His Son. And there's nothing more special than that. And you will walk in His shoes. You'll be shoulder to shoulder with Him. You'll be happy, you'll be sad. But it'll be the best experience of your life if you give what He wants you to give. And that's everything. And it's worth it. And I testify that He cares about you. And that He wants you to be a missionary. That you've been chosen to do this. And you've chosen it yourself. So go forward with faith and do it. And you'll feel so much happiness and so much joy that you won't even be able to describe it. And I now, looking back, I'm so happy that I was a missionary, especially in Guatemala, because that's where God wanted me to go. And I know that this church is true and it's led by Him. Your mission president is led by Him. Follow His counsel as closely as you can. Be so obedient to what you are commanded to do through preach my gospel, through your mission president, through the commandments. Be so obedient that you can't possibly be denied to help others come to Christ. And I just wanted to share that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
So I went to directly to the Guatemala MTC. I didn't go here to Provo. And I remember I got off the plane and it was so humid. I felt like I was swimming through the air, and it was so hot because I got there right during like the hottest part of the year, right before the rainy season starts. And I remember they hustled us all off the plane, and we were getting onto this big bus. And we got onto the bus, and it was completely decorated inside with like religious phrases or like Catholic phrases like God loves you and like all this stuff, which is all over Guatemala because everyone believes in God. Although some people don't really go to church very much, everyone has that belief in God. So that was something that really impacted me at first. Most of the missionaries there were all going to Central America, different countries, Americans and also other Central American missionaries serving in Central America. And the food is great. So there's not that many people. When I was there was only about 150 people. It fluctuated a little bit one time when I was there, but 150 people. So the chef, they have like a professional chef that makes you the food. And since it's not for a mass quantity of people, the food is delicious. And there's always ice cream and all you can eat. There's always fresh baked goods, and it's so delicious. The only bad thing I would say is that it's kind of small, especially compared to the Provo MTC. It's pretty small, so after 6 weeks, you felt a little trapped inside. You do get to go out, like on a P-Day trip every 2 weeks. You get to go to the temple once a week. And we moved around a lot just for like, we went to different outside classrooms they have for lack of a lot of classroom space they had inside. But I really liked it overall, and my teachers were great as well. So the Guatemala City South Mission covers most of the capital, a place called Misco, which is like an extension city of the capital, and then down a little bit on the coast and mostly by the El Salvador border. So right now in the Guatemala City South Mission there's nine stakes, and then there's a district as well. So most of the stakes are full of wards from varying sizes, and then there's some small branches. I served in 2 branches of about 30 to 35 people that would go to church every Sunday, and then I served in 2 wards that had over 200 people that were really strong wards and pretty in nicer areas, you could say. In Guatemala City South Mission, there's one temple. There's 2 temples in total in Guatemala, but there's one that's in the South Mission. That's the original temple it's been there since the 80s. I also served, one of my wards was the original like ward in all of Central America. So they call it, the ward members joke about calling it the true ward, like as if it was the true church, the true ward. And so that when they bring visitors, they're always like, well, I had to bring them to the true ward. And it's just a big joke since it was actually the first ward there. So the church is really strong. I'd say more outside the capital, it's a little bit smaller just because of lack of people. There's some little branches that they are growing, but it's just harder growth because the towns are small. And most people believe in God. Pretty much everyone. I think I met on my whole mission like 3 people that say they didn't believe in God, which is really rare. Most people are either Catholic or evangelical, of varying levels of activity, you could say. A lot of people claim it, but they don't actually go to church, and you can kind of tell. There's some Jehovah's Witnesses, some people from other churches, but I'd say mainly Catholics and evangelicals. Also, in my mission, in Guatemala as a whole, there's lots of different subculture groups. There's lots of different dialects that are spoken and cultures that are still like bound to ancient Mayan traditions, clothing and food and everything. In the South Mission, it's not as much. You'll see some people wear traditional clothing and doing traditional practices, but mostly in the South Mission, it's not as much. You won't see it as much as in other missions in Guatemala. So there's a lot of people, like no one really knows, but there's a lot of people that say that different sites in Guatemala are, oh, it's got to be from the Book of Mormon. There's a place called Lake Atitlan, which is really famous. It's really beautiful. And almost all members say, oh, that's the waters of Mormon. Like with confidence. We don't really know, but it could be. We do know the Book of Mormon was set around there, and the members know that, and it's a really interesting experience to be there in the setting of the Book of Mormon, teaching people about the Book of Mormon. There's lots of ruins around, which different members will say, oh, that's the city of Nephi, or that's Zarahemla. But we know that no one really knows. So I started out my mission in Jutiapa, which is pretty close to the El Salvador border. It's really hot and humid there. And then my second area was in a place called El Tesoro, which is means the treasure. I was there just for 6 weeks. It's in the place called, in a zone of Misco. So pretty much every city in Guatemala is divided by zones. Instead of northwest, southwest like we use here, they're divided by zones, and in each city there's a different number of zones. So in Misco, I was in a zone of Misco in my second area for 6 weeks, and it was really rainy the time I was there. In my third area, I was in a small branch called Las Lomas. That was about 30 or 35 people, and it was in a really poor area of town. It was technically a zone of the capital. My fourth area was probably my favorite area, was Montúfar, which is the true ward, they call it. It's like the center of town, right by the airport. It covers zone 8, 10, 13, 14, lots of zones of the capital. It's a pretty big area. And then I was in an area called Monteverde, which is also a zone of Misco. And then I was in Don Justo, which is up above the hill, going up behind the temple, above the temple. And then I ended my mission in Monjas. So I returned back starting by the El Salvador border. And I was in the same district as where I started the mission. Guatemalan people are generally very warm, especially compared to Americans. We would walk down the street and we'd say hi to everyone. And if you did that here, people would give you weird looks sometimes. But there it's normal to just, especially people you kind of know or people you're familiar with, to just say hi to them every time you see them in the street. People are generally very warm. They're inviting. Depending more, when I was outside the capital, more towards the El Salvador border, people would let you in just because they believe in God. Even if they really didn't want to progress in the gospel, or they were kind of in their church, they would still let us in and listen to a message about God, which is good and also frustrating at the same time. Because obviously as a missionary, you're looking for the elect of God, the people that are willing to not only listen but act upon it. So it's kind of hard. You need to weed out a lot of the people that are just listening because it's a message about God. I believe in God. I need to listen to it. But I really respect that about the Guatemalan culture, is their warmness, and that they're inviting, and that you can become friends with people fast, and they grow to love you and care about you. Guatemalans, for the most part, work really hard, and they don't get paid very much. The general, working out in the field or working construction job, you'll work all day. You won't have a set time to leave, so you'll work until the job gets done, which sometimes can be really late. And the minimum wage, you got paid $7 for the entire day. And you work really hard, and then you have to buy the food for your family, and you live day to day. An interesting thing about holidays, a couple holidays they have that are a little different they have Christmas, which is normal, but they celebrate a little bit different. They'll eat tamales or paches, which is similar to and they'll drink this hot fruit drink, and it's for Christmas. And as missionaries, we would just go from house to house and spend about 20 minutes or 30 minutes with each family, and they feed you, and then you go to another one and they feed you again, and then you go to another family and they feed you again. It's all the same thing, but you have to eat it. It's good. But that's kind of their tradition, is making a lot of this food and then just sharing it with their family and friends. And a little bit different with Christmas is that instead of doing normal things that we do at midnight, everyone will stay up until midnight, and then they'll light up a lot of fireworks. So it'll be really loud, and then they'll do the same thing in a week for New Year's. So it's a little bit different. We do that for New Year's, but obviously for Christmas we don't do that, and it was a little bit different getting used to that. And then people just stay up late, kind of partying all night, even into the wee hours of the morning. And so you wake up Christmas morning at your regular time, being a missionary, at 6:30 or so, and then there won't be anyone at all because everyone's asleep because they were partying late last night. I think this is kind of true in almost every place in the world, but especially in Guatemala, is that if someone gives you food, you have to eat it all. Because if not, they'll be like, oh, you don't like my food. Why do you not like my food? You didn't eat it. So at first you just don't really know at first when you get in the mission field. So you eat all the food, and then they give you more food because you ate all of it. So it's kind of a trick. So you have to eat all of it, but then if you're really full when you eat all of it, they're going to give you more. So you kind of need to pace your eating. If you like it, you can eat it faster because then they'll give you more. But if you are getting full, then you'll eat it slowly, finish it all, but eat it slowly after everyone. So then you won't offend anyone, and you won't get seconds. which is always good. Also, something I remember about holidays is that there they celebrate Holy Week. It's like our Easter is their Holy Week, and so a lot of people, especially the Catholics, will do a lot of processions or like parades around town, especially like in the central Catholic areas, like the center of town and the center of like the old town is what they call it, Antigua. They'll do huge parades with lots of people, and they'll carry large like Christ statues or different things, burn incense and do different things, and everyone gets it off for work. They don't have to go to school, and it becomes like kind of a national holiday, even though it's more of a Catholic thing. So Guatemala City, I think it's a really, really big, sprawling city, really huge. In one of my areas, you could stand up on the hill and you could see it, and it would just spread out forever. I think it's divided into maybe 22 or 23 zones, which the zones are usually a decent sized zone, and they're usually pretty big. You can usually, inside the city, in the capital, you can usually get most fast foods that you can get here. General luxuries, there's a thing called Price Mart, which is kind of like Costco, which there's like a couple, so if you're in the city and you're close, you can have access to that. There's a few Walmarts if you're close in the city. It changes as you go farther out. In my last area, we didn't have like anything, not even a grocery store. It was really far out, and there was just not those luxuries. Really cool places in Guatemala to see. There's lots of cool ruins. Lake Atitlan's really cool. These aren't necessarily places you can go during the mission, because the South Mission doesn't cover a lot of these, but they're cool places that you'll hear people talk a lot about in Guatemala. A place that's pretty close that a lot of missionaries always want to go to, but it's outside the mission, so you can't go, is Antigua, which is like the old city, which is the original capital. And I'm pretty sure the story is that it once flooded or something, or there was some motive for them to move the capital to where it is now. But it's like a famous old colonial town that a lot of tourists visit, and a lot of people will go to visit. So it's always like, they're like, oh, let's go to Antigua. Like the joke of, let's leave the mission and go there, even though people don't do that. Most of their houses are made of cinder block, because you don't really need heating or anything, so they build with cinder block and cement and rebar. Some of them are bigger, nicer homes, and then there's always really poor areas. The really poor houses will not have any lights, they'll have dirt floor, and they'll be made of like this corrugated lamina, like metal, or like sheet metal, you could say, just kind of wired or stapled together. That's the really poor housing. A lot of people, pretty much everyone has a pila in their house, which is a sink. So there's a central part where you can turn on the water and it stores up the water. Because almost in all places in Guatemala, there's not water like all during the day. So they have to have a big reservoir to be able to store it in. And that's where they wash their clothes by hand, or they wash their dishes by hand as well. Pretty much walking down the street, there's little tiendas, little stores everywhere to buy whatever you need, a drink, or buy something to make dinner with or anything. The food's generally, or the stuff you buy there's generally pretty cheap. And you'll legitimately, everywhere you go, you'll see them everywhere. I remember we went on a hike and we climbed to the top of a cool volcano that had like a little lake at the top, and there was a little tienda going up to the top. They're everywhere because people can just like open up their door in their house and use the bottom level as a store, or whatever they need. Something really important is that most people don't have a car. If you have if you have money, you'll have a car. If you have kind of a little bit more money, you'll have a motorcycle. And a funny thing is that since they only have one motorcycle for their family, they'll fit their entire family on their motorcycle. I remember we taught a couple it was them two, and the guy was really big. He was this big welder, big burly guy. And then they had two little kids as well. The guy would be on the front, and then he'd have a little kid in front, and then there'd be his other kid like kind of Oreoed between him and his wife. And then he even welded like this extension seat off the back of his motorcycle so they could all fit a little bit more comfortably. But that's something common to see, is like people turning motorcycles into minivans and taking their whole family on them. And then most people ride the bus. In the capital, there's these red buses, which are a little more dangerous. They go slower and there's more stops. But just depending on what area you're going through, you need to be careful because there's often lots of crime on the buses. Going outside the capital, there's buses that'll go faster since they're taking like longer trips and they won't stop as often. I remember and there's kind of just stops anywhere. There's not like set stops that the buses take. So you kind of just stand on the street and you like wave your hand and they'll stop. Usually, sometimes they don't stop or they don't see you. So I remember one time we were coming back from the office and we were going back to my area, and the bus passed, and I looked at my watch and I was like, oh, that might be the last bus. And we were like more than an hour walking distance from the house, and we had to walk a couple times already, and it was not fun. So I remember I looked at my companion and I'm like, we're going. And then we had to like get across 3 lanes of traffic to the median and then 3 more lanes of traffic because it was going the other way. And so we ran, and like when we could, we crossed through halfway, and then we kept running, and then we crossed the other way, and there was kind of some traffic. We ended up running like probably like 10 blocks. We were so sweaty because the bus did not see us to be able to stop. And then on the buses in the Capitol, there's like the front entrance and the back entrance, and you kind of can just hop on or get off whenever. And so I remember I sprinted, and I barely jumped, and I got on the back entrance, and then I like yelled at the bus driver stop so my companion could get on as well. But that's like typical, is that lots of people go in buses everywhere, especially as missionaries there, since we don't have cars. So the currency, they use quetzales there, which is like the currency specifically just for Guatemala. The currency exchange rate, I think, is about 7.5 quetzales to $1 right now. General things you can buy like a glass bottle of pop for about 3 quetzales, so about 35 cents or something like that. In the Capitol, you can get on the bus for 1 quetzal, and you can take it from, if you want, from the beginning of the first stop to the last stop. I think we got about 2,000, generally, depending on your area, it changes a little bit. We got about 2,000 quetzales per month per missionary. So usually half of that was to pay rent. Depending on how nice of house you lived in, it could range from about 1,000 quetzales to from about 1,000 to 1,500, something like that. So it'd be a little over $100 or something for a decent apartment that missionaries would live in. You can get an egg for like 1.5 quetzal, so really cheap. You can get fresh bread on the street. Tortillas are usually 4 for 1 quetzal, so it's really, really cheap. Generally the food's cheap. My favorite thing that I really miss is great haircuts that are so cheap. Haircuts here in America are so expensive. You pay like $15 and they just kind of bust it out, and it's not even like that great of a haircut. But there they'll use like a straight edge razor on the back of your neck, and they'll get it like all good lines and nice and straight, and it'll usually cost you 15 quetzales, which is like less than $2. So that's something I really miss about everything generally being pretty cheap. Transportation you can get around fairly cheap. So in Guatemala, especially in the city, but kind of you need to be careful anywhere, is that there is crime. A lot of missionaries, I was lucky I never actually got robbed, but you hear a lot of missionaries will get robbed, they'll just get their wallet stolen. So I'd say something important is to not carry around too much money. We got like a credit card to get our monthly money out. So when we'd get it out and then we'd go straight back to our house and we'd put it away, and then we just wouldn't carry that much money around, just like what we needed to buy a snack during the day or to get on the bus or something like that. It's pretty, you kind of just need to be careful about what areas you go in. You kind of always need to be somewhat on guard, be watching people that are maybe following you or watching you or doing like that, say interesting things, just to kind of be careful about it. And I'd probably say a good tip is to ask, especially if you get to a new area, ask the members kind of what areas, if there's any areas that need to be avoided or not. Because there's always areas that are really safe, that nothing really happens for the most part. But then there's maybe parts of your area that you'll be in that will be more dangerous after a certain hour at night. I remember coming back from an area we were visiting with a member, and we got down this way, and we had to go back because he had a car, and we were going back to his car to be able to leave. And I remember he told us when we left the appointment, he was like, oh, if you come down like this late at night again, you should go down this other pathway. And he's just giving us like a tip, but we had to go back to his car, so we had to go through that way. And then we kind of just had an encounter with some guys that were probably a little drugged out, that didn't, like, we were kind of just in their zone, and it was too late for us to be there, so we had a little encounter. We got out alright, so nothing happened, but you just need to be safe, and I'd say asking the members is always good. If you hear gunshots, run, which is obvious tip. And just be careful, kind of just be aware of your surroundings, especially when you're on the bus or if you're walking around late at night. And just kind of avoid large groups of men or other interesting things that happen. But for the most part, missionaries are generally respected. Most people believe in God, so they kind of respect us. Some people even watch out for you if you're getting into other trouble, even that aren't members, just because they know even if we're not from their church, we're doing a good thing, so they kind of watch out for you a little bit. I'd say most people in Guatemala are like truly Guatemalans. Most of the people I taught were Guatemalans. The only like really interesting thing about Guatemala is that there's a really rich culture in different like Mayan groups or like Mayan groups of Mayan descent, you could say. So as you go to different areas, you can see the different, they speak lots of different languages. Like you go to this area and be like a completely different dialect in this language. And it's cool because the Book of Mormon now is being translated into a lot of these languages, and they're completely different. I remember I saw the Book of Mormon of a language called Quiche, and the Book of Mormon was about that thick, so about like Bible sized. And then there was another one called Cachiquel, which is like about that thick. But most of the people we taught were like really Guatemalans, and most of the people that live there are Guatemalans, but you will see like the difference of like people of European descent and then people whose families have been there since forever, since the Lamanites maybe. So in my mission, you don't see a lot of those cultural, those like Mayan groups, but you will see people that have moved from other areas. Most of them speak Spanish, but you will come across people every once in a while that don't speak Spanish. I remember in one of my areas we taught a guy, and the guy had learned Spanish because he had before only spoke a couple native dialects, and he had learned Spanish, but his wife that lived with him hadn't learned Spanish. In the capital, for the most part, even guys that come from these traditional Mayan groups won't wear the traditional clothes anymore. But something I really thought was cool about Guatemala is that even in the capital where these people aren't from and that's not where their culture group is, a lot of the times they'll still wear their traditional clothing. So Guatemalan clothing for women there's something called corte, which is like a skirt. And depending on where you're from, it's a little bit different, but it's kind of like usually like a plaid design of different colors or different shades. And so they'll wrap that around, and then there's a belt that they put on, and then they tuck a shirt in, which is called a huipil. And it's of different, there's like big flowing ones, and some of them are really elaborate, and they make them all by hand. So something I really respected about that is that a lot of people, a lot of women, even in the capital, would wear their traditional clothing, and they would keep their culture alive, even though they had moved from that area. And I'd say maybe sometimes there's a little bit of maybe racism between the native groups and other like people of maybe European descent or something amongst them. Not that much, but maybe there's a little bit there. As far as I've heard some judgment about different like characteristics or stereotypes about those people. And you'll see a lot of, in the capital, almost all the people that make tortillas, all the women that make tortillas on the street will be from those native groups, and they'll still wear their native traditional clothing. There was 2 different occasions I remember. I remember in one of my areas we were up, like kind of high up in the mountains. In Guatemala, like there's not insulation in the homes, they're all cinder block and cement. And there's like a week or 2 during the year that's like a little bit chillier. Usually it's not that bad. Maybe you'll put a sweater on, but usually not. But since we were up in kind of the mountains, I remember it was so cold. We'd walk around. I got a sweater, and walking around, it's not that bad because you're walking around and you're kind of active. But I remember a couple nights I went to sleep, and it was so cold inside of our house because it was like warmer than outside, but not that much warmer than outside. And I found this box of old clothing that had like a bunch of I found some wool socks that I put on, a really thick sweatshirt, and then I put a couple shirts on, and I slept, which is rare. I usually was always really hot in Guatemala, but that was something I remember that was kind of extreme. Usually every night we would sleep with a fan, depending on your area, but pretty much always just because it's hot and it's kind of humid to keep the air circulating. I remember in my first area that was really hot, the power had gone out like right before we went to bed. So we didn't have fans, and I remember I just sat in bed, like laying in my sweat. And then a couple hours later it came on, and I think I was asleep in like 2 minutes once the fan came back on, once we had electricity. And then I think most extreme weather in Guatemala is just the rain. I'm from Oregon, so it usually like sprinkles kind of all day when during the time of the year that it rains. It's kind of like not that hard, but it'll rain, it'll kind of go off and then rain more. But in Guatemala, it like can be super sunny and hot, and then out of nowhere, all these clouds will roll in, and it'll just dump like so hard. Sometimes I remember we're in lessons, and you just like can't hear each other, so you just wait until the rain stops, and then you start again once it stops. Like I think I said, the drainage is usually like not great in the streets. So I remember one time we were coming back from a lesson, going to our house, and it rained really hard, and all the streets were filled, and there was a bunch of cars passing. So you have your umbrella up, blocking from all the rain that's coming from above, but then when a car comes, it like splashes up all the puddle water on the street. So you like, for a split second when the car comes, you have to like get the umbrella down and then put it back up to block the splash, and then you block the rain. And then we're kind of like dodging puddles, and then a car comes and you have to do it again, and then get the rain from the top. So that's kind of the most thing you'll experience in Guatemala is just rain, and sometimes it comes out of nowhere and it'll be really hard. And yeah. So Guatemalan food, I love Guatemalan food. I think the famous dish, at least where I served, I think mostly in all of Guatemala, is simply beans and eggs. It can be fried eggs, scrambled eggs, they do different things to it. And then the beans can be like whole cooked beans or refried beans, or they do different things to it. It's a really simple dish. At first I was like, this is kind of weird. It's especially like a breakfast dish. So I was like, why are we eating like beans in the morning? It seems like didn't go well with my stomach at first, but then I got used to it and I love it. And now that I'm home, I even make it every once in a while and I miss it. Pretty much in Guatemala, you eat every dish with fresh tortillas that people make by hand. Fresh corn tortillas that are about that big. And if they don't eat it with tortillas, they'll eat it with fresh bread. They call it French bread, but it's pretty much just like white rolls, you could say. It's really good. There's another food called pache, which is kind of like a tamale, which is like wrapped in a big banana leaf, and it's about that big, and it's kind of thick. It's made of potato, and they usually put like a little sauce inside or a little piece of chicken. And so they steam it up, and then you unwrap it, and it's kind of like stuck in this form. But it's really good, and you always eat it with bread. There's tamales, which is basically the same concept, but it's made out of corn instead of out of potato. And I think my favorite thing about the food was that it's all just mostly fresh. There's not like long preserved food like we have here a lot of times. Even one lady that would make us breakfast in one of my areas, she didn't even have a fridge. And she made us breakfast every morning. So she would go to the store every morning and she'd make us different things. And it was really good. So you can always get a wide array of fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, and they're really good. One thing I really like is there's always fresh, you can always make fresh juice, whether it's pineapple juice or papaya juice, or people make all sorts of juice since the fruit is grown right there. There's a thing called Morcaf that people drink a lot, especially members, which is like Mormon coffee, because it's coffee made of cereal, so it's like roasted up, but it doesn't actually contain coffee, so a lot of members will drink that. And when we teach them about the word of wisdom, we usually buy a bag of it. It's like costs like $1, and then we give it to them, and we trade it for their real coffee, and then we throw out their coffee. There's always fresh bread, which is delicious, and the fresh tortillas. At first it was weird because people eat it with every meal, but then it gets so normal that when you don't have it, you're like, where's my tortillas? I need some bread or tortillas. I can't eat this alone. Like here we just eat stuff with a fork, but there they like eat it with the fork and with the bread and the tortilla at the same time. And it's just really good because everything's fresh and good. And then people drink a lot of pop there. A lot of Coca-Cola and 7-Up and orange pop and all sorts of different things. I always like joke about the Guatemalan accent sometimes to people, and they totally like, in a loving way. Something I would say would be like, they speak in vos a lot, which is like an informal two, especially if you're among buddies. So they'll be like, "A la gran puchica vos," and they'll like speak up and down a lot. And I remember in my first area, so I like couldn't really understand a lot, but I could understand like the difference in tone when someone was asking me a question as opposed to just speaking. So even though I didn't really understand the question, I was listening and be like, oh, that's a question. And I remember one member, he lived in a really tiny house. It was like a one-room cinder block house. And there was lots of stuff in there, so we were kind of crammed in when it started to rain, so we moved inside his house. And I remember he asked me, I realized after what he said, he was like, oh, are you scared of my house? And pretty much to all questions, a safe answer. You can say yes to most questions. You're like, oh, do you want some food? Yes, and like different things. So I remember it was like, oh, are you afraid of my house? And I was like, sí. And then I was like, realized after, and I was like, oh, no. So I like had a couple. Usually you can get by with a yes answer to most questions, but a couple times I remember that it didn't really work. My first area was out in Jutiapa, and there's lots of little like villages around the main town. And I remember I was really frustrated one day because I didn't understand what people were saying. I could like I think this is the opposite of generally what people do, is they can usually understand a lot but not really speak a lot at first. It was the opposite for me. I could like speak, generally get across what I wanted to say, but I couldn't really understand what people were saying to me. But I remember we were like visiting different villages, and I was expressed to my companion in my broken Spanish that I didn't really understand what people were saying. And he's like, yeah, it's because in like all the villages they have like different accents, or they speak in different ways, which was a little frustrating. And Guatemalan Spanish, there's lots of slang that they use. I realized, especially after I get home, that I'm like, oh, I thought that was like normal Spanish, but I realized it's just specifically Guatemalan Spanish. But that a lot of people use, that they're kind of slangy, but at the same time everyone uses them. Guatemalan Spanish is, you could say, like pretty normal accent. You'll see in Honduras that people speak with a lot more like of an H sound when it really shouldn't be, or if there's an S sound, they'll leave it off, which is true in like Nicaragua and Panama too. But generally, Guatemalans will pronunciate all the words, all the letters that they should. They kind of speak like a little sing-songy, but not as much as like Mexican Spanish as well. So in Guatemala, most of the time it's hot and it's humid, so you just need to wear light clothing that you can sweat in a lot, because you pretty much be sweating for 2 years, at least in the South Mission. And in Guatemala, from about May or middle of April until about the middle of September, almost October, is the rainy season, and it rains a lot. And so I would maybe something is just pack a sturdy umbrella. Maybe that's something because I remember I went out in my first area. It was raining so hard. We'd walked out to dinner at a really far away place, and I pulled out my umbrella, we walked out the door, and it flew up and then it flew away. And I got so soaked the entire way home. I remember we were walking in the street. So often the drainage isn't that great in Guatemala, like their central infrastructure drainage system. So we were walking in the street, and it was like almost up to our knee, the water that night when we were walking home. So I'd just say make sure to prepare for getting wet. Pack a light raincoat. I had packed a raincoat that was really good for water, but it was kind of thick, so it was like I didn't wear it because it was hot and sweaty, even though it protected me from the rain. So I'd say a good raincoat, but also one that's light, because you're always walking around and you're always sweating. I remember my mission, it was pretty much, I was always wet, always. It was, because the days that it rained, it would usually rain at night, but even during the day, it got like more humid and more hot before it rained. So you're sweating so much all day, and then you were just wet at night from the rain. So you're just constantly soaking wet from either sweat or rain. In my last area, we were teaching a couple. His name was Alexander, and her name was Sylvia. And they had a really interesting conversion experience, you could say. So we first taught their mom. She didn't really want to listen to us. His mom. She didn't really want to listen to us. But we eventually convinced her to let us teach her a lesson. And then we noticed that she had a bunch of dishes, because she made food, and then she drove around on a little motorcycle and she sold the food like door to door. So that's how we kind of got the in, is we washed a lot of her dishes. And then after her initial not really wanting to listen to us, we kind of broke the ice with that. She eventually didn't progress in the gospel, was really into her church and didn't really want to change. But right next door lived her son, Alexander, and then Sylvia. So we eventually got him to go to church. Sylvia kind of felt she had an answer, felt she had gained a testimony, and was ready to get baptized just by the way she had felt at church, that she'd felt really welcome, and that she had felt the Spirit there. Alexander was a little bit tougher, you could say. It was a little bit tougher for him to gain that testimony. He kind of told us in one of the lessons that he believed in everything that we were teaching, and he kind of just had a doubt about Joseph Smith, that he had really been an instrument to restore the gospel. So we really kind of were nailing that hard. just to help reinforce that and help them to gain that testimony. So I remember we watched a restoration movie. We talked about kind of the life of Joseph Smith. We talked about the restoration a couple times. And he was just looking to get that answer. And I know he was doing his part. He was reading, he was praying, going to church to get that answer. And I remember one day we went back to an appointment. We would always ask, oh, how did the reading go that we had left you? And he'd always have like several questions. So we asked, oh, do you have any questions for us? And he was like, yeah, I want you to explain 2 Nephi 3:5. And I kind of thought in my head, I was like, oh, that's interesting. We hadn't even left for him to read. But we went to it, we read it, and it's one of the few prophecies in the Book of Mormon that talks about Joseph Smith, that he was going to be the prophet of the restoration. And when we explained that to him, you could see that the light bulb just like flicked in his head. That he didn't really understand it when he first read it, but now that he understood it, and we explained that it was one of the few scriptures that talked about Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon, that mostly it talked about Christ. But I remember that, and we asked him, oh, like, how did you come across this scripture? And he said he woke up one day with the numbers 2, 3, 5 in his head. And I know that the Spirit told him to go read in the Book of Mormon, and he looked in the Book of Mormon in 2 Nephi 3:5. And we testified to him that was his answer, a very specific answer from God, from what he specifically needed to know, that Joseph Smith truly was a prophet. And I know that was from God, and it was based on the efforts that he was doing, that God had given him that answer. And then we kept teaching them, and then they got baptized, and then we kept teaching them. We taught them the lessons over again. And the only thing after that they had a doubt about, that they kind of both did, was baptisms for the dead. And so they're kind of like, we'd be like, oh, do you have any more questions? And in a couple lessons, he'd be like, oh, I still kind of don't know about those baptisms for like the grandpas and the great-grandparents that you do. So we were kind of just teaching them that, and we prepared them. A special thing about the Guatemala City South mission is that the temple's there. And our mission president gave us permission, if we helped some convert or a member that we had reactivated search for names, do their family history, we could even take them to the temple to do those baptisms with them. So we were really working on that, helping them prepare to be able to go to the temple so they could have the first-hand experience and have like truly understand and gain a testimony about baptisms for the dead. And so we got it where we arranged it and we could take them to the temple, Alexander and Sylvia. And so Alexander that day was going to get baptized for his dad as well as Sylvia's dad, her dad. And we did it, and we could tell it was a spiritual experience. And the next lesson we went back, we talked to them about that experience they had in the temple. This big burly guy, Alexander, kind of got a little emotional. And we talked to them both about how they'd felt in the temple. And they both said that they felt that both of their dads were there. That they were there to witness that baptism, and that they had accepted it. And that was the spiritual confirmation that they needed to know that was truly a thing, that temples are necessary, and that baptisms for the dead is a real ordinance and a blessing that we have. So they had two great spiritual experiences that were specifically for the doubt that they had, and it was based on the efforts that they were doing to come to know if it was true. A couple things they eat in Guatemala is one thing called tacuacin, which I realized later, I thought it was like a giant rat, because that's what it looks like, but I realized later it's possum. In one of my areas, like, a guy just set up traps like down in the gully, and he trapped a bunch, and then like the entire neighborhood that day took out their little grill outside on the street, and they were cooking this giant rat thing that was actually a possum. And then right during the rainy season, when it starts in May, there's this thing called sampopo, which is like a giant ant with wings. So like, I think something with the rain like brings them in, like right when the rainy season starts. And then you'll see them all on the street, these like ants about that big. And the interesting thing is that people actually eat them. So they're like, you'll see little kids or whoever like with little plastic bags, and they'll pick them up off the street. And then I think they'll like take a part off, and they'll take the wings off, and then they like fry them up in oil or in margarine or something, and then people eat them. And you can even buy them in the store. They're really expensive because they're only for like a week or two during the year. But they're not bad. They taste kind of like butter, kind of like toasty a little bit. So there was an experience where we were out visiting with a member. We'd gone down a place we'd never gone at night, and it was kind of late. And when we were coming back, I heard someone say like, "Oh, are you lost?" And I kind of ignored it, and then I heard another be like, "Yeah, I think they're lost." And then another guy was like, "Oh, get the flip out of here." And then I realized like they were all, I thought they were kind of separated, but they're all kind of in the same like gang or clan or group or whatever. And so as we got towards the car, we were with a member and we were going towards his car. One of the guys like started shoving my companion, and I was like, "Oh, take it easy, like we're leaving right now." And so then the member unlocked the car, the member and my companion got in, and then of course my door, I was getting in the front and it didn't unlock. So I was like, "Oh," and then I like pushed over my companion really quick, and then I got in the car, and right as I shut the door, the guy like punched the window really hard. Thankfully it didn't break, and then another one like punched the window on the other side, and they like all kicked the car, and then we sped out really fast. So yeah, I think there were kind of drugs that were involved in that or something, but it was kind of just a little bit of a sketchy experience. So you just need to be careful. During the day, usually there's not that much going on, but you just need to be careful where you are at night to make sure you're not in a dangerous area. I remember also I was in another area. I was in divisions with another American, and we were down, and we had to go to this appointment down in this kind of alley. And we were going down the alley. It was pretty dark, but like kind of the whole area is like that. It's kind of a poor alley area. And so we're going down, and I remember he said, "Maybe I don't think we should be here." And then right after that, we heard a bunch of gunshots, pretty close. So we just ran as fast as we could and got out of there. And then we didn't really go down there at night anymore, which is good. And other than that, I just remember that Guatemalans, like, you can buy cans and bottles of pop, but most people drink them in glass bottles that are thick that you like return because they're way cheaper since they don't have to pay for as much packaging. And so they're really thick and pretty heavy. And I remember walking down the street one time and someone like, some drunk guy or something from across the street just threw the bottle, and I like saw it when it was right there, right in front. And then thankfully it landed at our feet because he was drunk, so he didn't have that good of aim. So there's always like kind of some experiences. Thankfully I never got robbed on my mission, so that was good. I think one of the most important things I learned on our mission is that as missionaries, we like really don't do anything. I think one of my favorite parts of the mission was that truly I came to know that we're instruments in the hands of God. That even though we're the ones like knocking the doors, walking the streets, that we're not the ones that make people convert to the gospel. That truly it's something important in what we're doing. It's something that God has allowed us the opportunity to do that, to be those instruments. But truly that it's the Spirit that converts people. When that converts us as missionaries, that converts us as members, that converts other people that we had taught. That's something I definitely learned, is that we don't really do much in our callings and anything we do. It's God that does it, but He allows us to be instruments in that work. For me, the hardest thing about being a missionary was working with my companions. Some of the companions, like a couple of them I'm really good buddies with and we got along super well. But other ones, it's just sometimes it's hard to see eye to eye. You have different levels of how you want to work, the way you want to work. There's some people that have, there'll be different missionaries that'll have different commitments to the gospel, to being a missionary, and you'll really be able to like see their motives for doing that. So I think that was the hardest thing, is being able to, despite our differences, work together as a companionship, because it's really important to have unity as missionaries. If you don't have unity, you're not going to have the Spirit, and you're not going to be able to be an effective tool. So I'd say just the best thing is to just love your companion. Love him for who he is. Don't judge him. And look for the best in him. Look for ways to compliment him, see the good things he's doing. And think of ways to justify what he's doing, because we really don't know why people act the way they act. But serving them is the best way to, doing simple things of service is the best way to be able to grow to love them as the Savior would love them. In one of my areas, we're kind of having trouble finding new investigators. Just one week it kind of gotten bad. Usually we'd find, in Guatemala, I usually find about 20 or more where I was in this area a week. And I think we'd gone all week and we only found about 7 investigators up until Saturday. So I remember on Sunday, it was Fast Sunday, and I decided to fast, specifically asking God to help us find investigators that wanted to progress, that were ready to hear about this gospel. And so I started my fast on Sunday afternoon, after church, after eating lunch. And by the end of that night on Sunday, we'd found 10 investigators. So we'd more than doubled what we had found. New investigators, we doubled what we'd found the entire week. And amongst one of those people was a man named Mario. And Mario was truly prepared by God. We didn't prepare him. We didn't do almost anything. But he was prepared by God to accept this gospel in that time. I especially noticed that when we taught him the word of wisdom. Because pretty much everyone in Guatemala has a problem with one of the things of the word of wisdom. Most of it is coffee, because everyone drinks coffee. It's like a Guatemalan thing that they'll like put it in the little baby's bottle when they're little and give them coffee because it's really cheap. But I remember when we taught him the word of wisdom, so we told him the 5 things that we don't consume with the word of wisdom. And we asked him, do you have any challenges with these 5 things? And he said, I used to drink coffee and tea, but about 2 or 3 days ago, I stopped drinking them because I felt it wasn't good for me. I know that was from the Spirit. He started to keep a commandment a few days before we even taught him about the commandment. He truly was an elect of God. He eventually got baptized. He has gone to the temple to do vicarious baptisms and confirmations, and is a great strength of source for all his little brothers that eventually later got baptized. I also taught someone named Juan. His wife's name was Alma, and she had just gotten baptized about 2 weeks before, I think, when I came to the area. And Juan hadn't been baptized yet. They were both going to church pretty much every Sunday. The only thing that Juan really struggled with was that he had to quit smoking. That was like what was holding him back. You could tell that he had mostly gained a testimony that he liked the church. So we were kind of especially focusing on him while also helping her to stay active and do the things that she needed to do as a new member. Juan kept trying, and he eventually quit smoking for long enough, and he got baptized. I remember I left the area shortly after his baptism, but I would keep calling him every once in a while, because what we did finally when we were there to help him quit smoking is that we would usually go to visit him every other day, and the days when we didn't go, we would call him to make sure how he was going with his plan to quit smoking and how it had gone that day. Sometimes with successful days and sometimes with not successful days. So then after I would call him every once in a while to see how he was doing, see if he had still not smoked. And I remember I talked to him a little bit after, and he said I felt that he had smoked. But I motivated him again, helped him to keep going with his plan. And then I talked to him, I think, for about 9 months to a year. I would call him just every once in a while and see how it was going. And he would tell me, I went a week and a half, or I went 2 weeks, and then I smoked a half a cigarette. So he wasn't like, he'd improved so much from where he first was, but he still had that temptation that was always there that he would fall into every once in a while. That was like just enough to keep him back from getting the priesthood and really like advancing in the gospel and having responsibilities and all the things he needed to do to stay active in the church. And I remember I got a call, I think about a year after I'd left the area, and it was from one of my mission leaders, and he told me that Alma, his wife, had passed away. That she had had a stroke, and then she was in the hospital for a little while, but she had passed away. So the first thing it was obviously really sad for me to hear that. But I think the first thing I thought of was I wasn't sure how Juan was going to take that. Sometimes people take trials, new members or converts take trials as it'll strengthen them, but oftentimes it'll drive them into inactivity and other things like that. So I was worried about Juan. I remember I called him after I got that call from my mission leader. I asked how he was doing. He was obviously really broken up, but I called him that first time, and then I think I called him about a week later, give or take, and he had quit smoking. And then I talked to him about a month or 2 later, and he told me that he'd met with his branch president, and he had the goal to receive the Aaronic priesthood in about a week, and then receive the Melchizedek priesthood in state conference a couple weeks after that. And we stayed in contact, and he eventually received both priesthoods. And I really saw the difference. Before, it was his own strengths trying to quit smoking, and it was never enough. After his wife died, it was enough motivation it was an eye-opener for him to rely on the strength of the Lord. through his own efforts, but through the grace of God, through his strength. It was enough for him to completely quit smoking. And now Juan is active in the church, and the best thing is that he's preparing to be able to be sealed to his wife. And I know that's one of the great blessings of temple work, and it's something that often converts don't understand, but he understood that and has had the spiritual confirmation that it's something he's going to do, and he has that goal. Being a missionary is one of the greatest opportunities that I've had in my life. It was truly a blessing. At times it's hard, but amongst all the blessings, all the miracles that I saw, the challenges don't even stick out. I often forget them amongst all the miracles that I saw. It's truly was an amazing experience to see miracles on a daily basis and to be an instrument in the hands of God, to bring conversion to other people, to help them be converted by the Spirit to the restored gospel. I really know that this gospel is true. I'm so thankful for the opportunity that I had to serve and love the people of Guatemala, to help them know about this truth, about this great gospel. It's brought so many blessings to my life. And I was grateful to be able to help bring those blessings to them. I know that Christ truly atoned for us. All the weaknesses that I had as a missionary, there's so many, countless weaknesses, but the atonement of Christ through his grace, I was able to be strengthened. He was really like the compensating power, the difference. He made the difference between my weaknesses and what these people needed, the experiences that they needed to have. I know that the Book of Mormon is the greatest tool that we have as missionaries, and that it's the tool to conversion, to help people know that the restored gospel is real. Something I'd say to anyone preparing to serve a mission is to take advantage of the time. It's 2 years, and it's really cliche, but it goes by really fast. Someone told me before my mission that I have 2 years to do it and my entire life to look back upon it. And I know that is true. I've looked back upon my mission and all the things that I learned, and I'm grateful that I was able to serve. So I'd just say take advantage of the time that you have as a missionary and serve with all your strength, and that you will see those miracles and be able to be an instrument in the hands of God.